In the dim first-class cabin of a night flight from Columbus, Ohio, to Miami, an entitled man tried to force a black woman out of his row with cutting words until a stunning twist revealed she was the pilot, flipping his world upside down. Kenneth Whitmore strode through the quiet terminal of John Glenn Columbus International Airport, his polished leather loafers echoing against the tiled floor with a rhythm that matched his unwavering confidence. At 65 years old, the silver-hailed businessman carried himself with an air of unshakable authority, his tailored gray suit clinging to his frame like a second skin, the fabric shimmering faintly under the airport's soft overhead lights. A sleek black briefcase swung at his side, its leather surface polished to a mirror-like sheen, a symbol of the wealth and status he'd spent decades cultivating. He'd flown first class on this Columbus to Miami route countless times over the years, each trip a ritual of luxury and control, a space where he expected nothing less than deference from everyone around him. It was 9:00 p.m., the terminal bathed in a gentle glow, the hum of late-night travelers filling the air with a quiet buzz. A few passengers lingered at the gates, their voices muffled as they spoke in hushed tones, some clutching coffee cups, others scrolling through their phones, their faces illuminated by the blue light of screens. Kenneth adjusted the cufflinks on his shirt, the gold glinting as he moved, his lips curling into a smug grin that spoke of entitlement and expectation. He approached the gate, his boarding pass already in hand, the crisp paper bearing the golden stamp of first-class privilege. The gate agent, a young woman with a tired smile, scanned his pass and nodded, her voice a soft murmur as she said, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Whitmore." Kenneth didn't bother to respond, his mind already on the flight ahead. The plush leather seats, the complimentary glass of scotch, the quiet hum of the cabin where he could work undisturbed. He boarded the plane, his steps deliberate, the narrow jet bridge amplifying the sound of his loafers as he made his way to the cabin. The first-class section greeted him like an old friend, its dim lighting casting long shadows across the rows of seats, the leather upholstery gleaming softly, the faint scent of coffee lingering from the galley nearby. A few passengers were already seated, their voices low as they settled in, some flipping through magazines, others adjusting their neck pillows. Kenneth approached his window seat, 1A, his designated throne for the next 3 hours, ready to settle in for a flight as predictable as the ones he'd taken 100 times before. But that sense of predictability shattered the moment he saw her. A black woman sat in 1B, right beside his seat, her posture poised and professional, a leather portfolio open on her lap, its pages filled with charts and notes. Janelle Carter, 30 years old, radiated a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around her, her dark eyes scanning a flight manifest with a focus that was almost palpable. Her fingers tapped lightly on the paper, a steady rhythm that spoke of someone deeply engrossed in their work. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed the night's route. She wore a sharp navy blazer, its tailoring impeccable, the fabric hugging her frame with a professional elegance, her braided hair neatly tucked behind her ears, each strand in place, a testament to her meticulous nature. A small pin on her blazer caught the light for a moment, a tiny set of wings that hinted at a deeper story, though Kenneth didn't notice, his mind too clouded by his own prejudice to see the significance. Janelle adjusted her posture slightly, her movements precise, the kind of precision that came from years of training, her fingers brushing against the manifest as she made a small note in the margin, her handwriting neat and controlled, a habit born from countless hours in high-stakes environments. Kenneth's grip tightened on his briefcase, the leather creaking under his fingers, his jaw clenching as a wave of irritation surged through him. He set the briefcase down with a deliberate thud, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin, hoping to unsettle her, to make her look up and acknowledge his presence. But Janelle didn't flinch. She was too focused, her attention locked on the manifest, her lips moving slightly as she murmured coordinates to herself, her voice a soft whisper that barely reached his ears. Kenneth cleared his throat, the sound harsh and intentional, but still, Janelle didn't react. His irritation deepened, a simmering heat that coiled in his chest, his entitlement flaring at the thought of sharing his space with someone he'd already deemed out of place. "Excuse me," he said, his voice laced with forced civility, each word dripping with condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Janelle finally glanced up, her expression calm but her gaze sharp, a quiet strength in her eyes that made Kenneth shift uncomfortably for a fleeting moment. She nodded once, her movement precise, almost mechanical. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone steady, unwavering, before returning to her work, her fingers resuming their rhythm on the paper, her focus unbroken. Kenneth's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching against the fabric of his suit jacket, the silk lining brushing against his wrist as he fought to keep his composure. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone he'd already judged as unworthy of first class. Someone who, in his mind, didn't belong in the space he'd claimed as his own. He sat down heavily, the leather seat creaking under his weight. The sound a faint protest in the quiet cabin. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a chaotic swirl. This wasn't right, not on his flight, not in his world. He adjusted his tie, the silk knot tight against his throat, his breath shallow as he tried to suppress the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. He glanced around, hoping to catch the eye of a flight attendant, someone who could rectify this mistake, but the cabin was still settling, the crew busy with pre-light checks, their voices a distant murmur as they moved through the aisle. A few rows back, a young man named Ethan watched the exchange, his stomach twisting with a familiar unease that made his chest tighten. At 28 years old, Ethan was a freelance journalist with a sharp eye for stories, his denim jacket slightly worn at the elbows, a testament to the countless trips he'd taken in pursuit of truth. He'd seen this kind of subtle racism before, the kind cloaked in polite words, the kind that stung just as deeply as overt hostility. He remembered a time when he'd been stopped by security at an airport, his bag searched for no reason other than looking suspicious, despite being a frequent flyer with a clean record. The memory burned in his mind, a bitter reminder of the injustice that still lingered in spaces like this, and it made his blood simmer as he watched Kenneth's thinly veiled disdain. Ethan discreetly pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the camera app, ready to capture what he sensed was coming, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He adjusted his position, leaning forward slightly, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding ahead, his breath shallow as he prepared to document the truth. Nearby, a middle-aged woman in a sweater glanced over, her curiosity piqued by the tension in Kenneth's posture, her fingers pausing on the page of the novel she'd been reading. She whispered to her husband, her voice barely audible, "Looks like trouble." Her words a quiet observation that carried a hint of concern. A young man in a hoodie, seated across the aisle, looked up from his phone, his earbuds dangling as he sensed the shift in the cabin's atmosphere, his brow furrowing as he tried to piece together what was happening. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken tension that rippled through the first-class section, a tension that Kenneth seemed determined to escalate, his entitlement boiling beneath the surface, ready to erupt. He leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest, his mind already plotting his next move, his eyes darting toward the call button overhead, a silent promise of the storm he was about to unleash. Kenneth shifted in his seat, his arms crossing tightly over his chest, the crisp fabric of his suit rustling with every agitated movement, the sound a faint echo in the stillness of the cabin. He reached up and pressed the call button overhead, his finger jabbing at it with a force that betrayed his growing frustration, the soft chime cutting through the quiet hum like a sharp, insistent demand. Janelle didn't react, her focus still locked on the manifest, her fingers tracing the route with a steady precision that spoke of years of training, her eyes scanning the numbers with a quiet intensity. She adjusted her blazer, the navy fabric shifting slightly as she leaned forward, her brow furrowing as she double-checked a coordinate, her lips moving silently as she committed the details to memory, her small wing pin catching the light again, a subtle reminder of her role that went unnoticed by Kenneth. But Kenneth's eyes burned with determination, a fire that refused to be extinguished. He'd make sure someone fixed this error, someone put this woman in her place. As his breath came faster now, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched the pounding of his pulse, his entitlement flaring like a flame fed by years of unchecked privilege. A flight attendant named Mia Torres approached, a 32-year-old woman with a warm but firm demeanor, her navy uniform pristine, the fabric hugging her frame with a professional elegance. Her name tag caught the faint light, the silver surface gleaming as she moved, her steps measured but purposeful, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun that spoke of her attention to detail. "How can I help you, sir?" Mia asked, her voice professional but tinged with curiosity, her eyes scanning the row for any sign of trouble, her posture straight but relaxed, ready to handle whatever came her way. Kenneth forced a tight-lipped smile, the expression more a grimace than a gesture of warmth, his head tilting toward Janelle with a deliberate slowness, his tone low but sharp, each word a calculated strike. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, his voice slicing through the air like a blade, the words heavy with implication. "I'd like to request a seat change. I don't feel comfortable here." Mia's smile faltered, her gaze flicking to Janelle, who looked up, her jaw tightening slightly, but her composure unshaken, a quiet strength in her posture that made Mia pause. Janelle set the manifest down for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the leather cover, her eyes meeting Mia's with a calm that contrasted sharply with Kenneth's agitation. "Is there an issue with the seat itself?" Mia asked, pulling out her tablet to check the manifest, her fingers moving quickly over the screen, the soft glow illuminating her face as she scrolled through the passenger list. Kenneth's voice dropped even lower, his words deliberate, heavy with the weight of his prejudice, his tone a venomous whisper that sent a chill down Mia's spine. "It's not the seat, it's her," he said, his eyes darting to Janelle with a sneer of disdain, his lip curling as if the very sight of her offended him, his words a clear accusation, a judgment that needed no further explanation. Mia's fingers paused on the screen, her breath catching for a moment as her own experiences with discrimination as a Latina woman flashed through her mind. She remembered the times she'd been overlooked for promotions early in her career, the snide comments from passengers who assumed she didn't belong in first class, the subtle jabs that stung long after the flights had ended. She knew that tone, had felt that judgment, and it made her stomach churn, a bitter taste rising in her throat as she fought to keep her expression neutral. "Sir," she said, her voice firm, unwavering, her eyes locking onto Kenneth's with a quiet intensity, "Miss Carter is in her assigned seat, 1B. There are no open first-class seats available." Kenneth's face flushed, a deep red creeping up his neck, his entitlement flaring like a wildfire, his voice rising just enough to stir a few passengers nearby, their heads turning with curiosity, their eyes narrowing as they sensed the tension. "Then move her to economy," he snapped, his words cutting through the stillness, sharp and unyielding, a command that brooked no argument, his hands gripping the armrests as if anchoring himself against the rage boiling inside him. Ethan, still watching from a few rows back, felt a surge of anger that made his chest tighten, his fingers gripping his phone a little harder as he recorded the scene. He'd been profiled himself, stopped by security once for looking suspicious, despite being a frequent flyer. The memory a raw wound that still ached when he thought about it. He could still hear the officer's voice, cold and dismissive, as he'd been pulled aside, his bag searched while other passengers walked by, their eyes averted, their silence a tacit approval of the injustice. That memory fueled his anger now, a fire that burned in his veins as he watched Kenneth's thinly veiled racism unfold, and he knew he couldn't stay silent. He started recording, his hands steady but his heart racing, a small act of defiance against the injustice unfolding before him. His breath shallow as he zoomed in on Kenneth's sneering face, capturing every word, every gesture. But then Kennan noticed him, his sharp eyes catching the glint of Ethan's phone in the dim light, the reflection a beacon in the darkened cabin. "What do you think you're doing?" Kennan barked, leaning forward, his voice a low growl that sent a chill down Ethan's spine, his eyes narrowing with a predatory intensity that made Ethan's pulse quicken. "Turn that off, or I'll sue you for invasion of privacy." Kenneth's words were a threat, a weapon meant to intimidate, his finger jabbing toward Ethan with a force that made the air between them crackle with tension. Ethan's heart pounded, his palms sweaty as he held the phone steady, his voice quiet but firm, refusing to back down in the face of Kenneth's hostility. "This is a public space, sir. I'm within my rights," he said, his words a small but powerful stand against Kenneth's intimidation, his jaw tight as he met Kenneth's glare head-on, his resolve unshaken. A murmur rippled through the cabin, a few passengers whispering their approval, their voices a soft undercurrent of support for Ethan's courage. The middle-aged woman in the sweater looked up from her novel, her eyes wide as she whispered to her husband, "He's got guts." Her voice a mix of admiration and concern, her fingers tightening on the book as she watched the scene unfold. The young man in the hoodie pulled out his earbuds entirely now, his phone forgotten as he leaned forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and indignation, his lips parting as if to speak but stopping short, unsure of what to say. A businessman in a pinstripe suit, seated a row ahead, turned his head slightly, his brow furrowing as he muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." His voice a quiet condemnation of Kenneth's behavior, a small but significant sign of solidarity in the growing storm. A young girl no older than 12 peeked over the back of her seat, her wide eyes catching Janelle's for a fleeting moment, her small smile a quiet gesture of kindness, a subtle reminder that not everyone shared Kenneth's prejudice. A glimmer of hope in the tense air. Janelle, meanwhile, closed her portfolio with a soft snap, the sound sharp in the tense air, her patience thinning but her calm unshaken, a quiet strength in her movements that spoke of a resilience forged through years of facing similar prejudice. She adjusted her blazer again, her fingers brushing against the fabric with a deliberate slowness, her eyes flicking toward Ethan for a brief moment, a flicker of gratitude in her gaze as she acknowledged his bravery. She knew what it meant to stand up, to face down hostility with nothing but your own resolve, and in that moment she felt a kinship with Ethan, a shared understanding of the fight against injustice. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride, a small but powerful reminder that she wasn't alone, that there were others who saw the truth, who refused to let it be buried under the weight of privilege and prejudice. Kenneth wasn't backing down, his resolve as unyielding as the steel frame of the plane itself. He pressed the call button again, his fingers trembling with a mix of anger and entitlement, the sharp chime slicing through the stillness of the cabin, its tone more piercing now, as if echoing his mounting frustration. Mia returned, her steps brisk, her patience visibly strained, her lips pressed into a thin line that betrayed the effort it took to maintain her professional demeanor. Her navy uniform remained crisp, but a faint crease had formed on her brow, a silent testament to the tension Kenneth had unleashed. "Sir, I've already explained there are no open seats," she said, her tone clipped but professional, her voice carrying a firmness that left no room for negotiation. Kenneth sat up straighter, his shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle, his voice now loud enough to wake those nearby, the words spilling out with a venomous edge. "I don't feel safe sitting here," he declared, his words a calculated weapon, designed to force action, to bend the situation to his will by invoking a fear that was as baseless as it was cruel. A hush fell over the cabin, the air growing thick with tension, passengers stirring from their seats, some glaring at Kenneth with undisguised disdain, others whispering among themselves, their voices a soft buzz of disapproval. Ethan's camera stayed steady, his fingers gripping the phone with a determination that matched the fire in his chest, capturing every word, every sneer, his own anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew exactly what Kenneth was implying, the insinuation that Janelle's presence posed a threat, a stereotype rooted in prejudice that made Ethan's blood boil. He adjusted the angle of his phone, zooming in on Kenneth's flushed face, the beads of sweat beginning to form on his forehead, a small but telling detail that revealed the cracks in his composure. Ethan's heart pounded, a mix of fury and resolve, his jaw tight as he silently vowed to ensure the world saw this moment for what it was, an ugly display of entitlement and racism. Janelle set her portfolio aside with a deliberate slowness, her movements calm but weighted with purpose, her eyes locking onto Kenneth's with a quiet intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat, the leather creaking faintly under his weight. Her braided hair remained neatly tucked behind her ears, but a single strand had come loose, framing her face like a quiet defiance against the chaos Kenneth had created. She adjusted the lapel of her navy blazer, the fabric crisp against her white blouse, her posture unwavering despite the tension in the air. "Sir," she said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the tension like a blade, "if you have a specific complaint, I'd like to hear it." Kenneth's breath caught, his confidence faltering for a split second, his eyes darting away from hers as if unable to withstand the weight of her gaze. He hadn't expected her to challenge him directly, to demand accountability for his veiled accusations, and for a fleeting moment, doubt flickered across his face, his fingers twitching against the armrest as he struggled to regain his footing. But he straightened, doubling down, his tone sharp and unyielding. "I just don't feel comfortable," he repeated, his voice rising. "And I have the right to feel safe on this flight." Mia's eyes narrowed, her frustration bubbling to the surface, her hands tightening around the tablet she held, the plastic edges digging into her palms as she fought to keep her composure. She'd dealt with passengers like Kenneth before, entitled, demanding, quick to wield their privilege like a weapon, but this was crossing a line, a blatant attempt to weaponize a false sense of fear to justify his prejudice. "Sir, if you cannot remain seated and follow instructions, I'll have to ask you to deplane," she warned, her voice steady but unyielding, her stance firm as she stood her ground, her gaze never wavering from Kenneth's. The threat hung in the air, a quiet ultimatum that shifted the dynamic in the cabin, a reminder of the authority she held, an authority Kenneth had underestimated in his arrogance. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin, passengers nodding in approval of Mia's stance, their whispers a quiet chorus of support that seemed to bolster her resolve. A young woman in a hoodie, sitting 2 rows ahead, muttered under her breath, "Good for her," her voice carrying just enough for Kenneth to hear, her words a small but powerful rebuke that made his face burn with a mix of shame and rage. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap, seated near the aisle, leaned toward his teenage son and whispered, "That guy's out of line." His voice low but firm, his words a reflection of the growing solidarity among the passengers. From the perspective of this father, who had taught his son to stand up for what was right, Kenneth's actions were a lesson in what not to be. A man so consumed by prejudice that he couldn't see the humanity in the person sitting beside him. An elderly woman in a floral scarf, seated a row behind Ethan, adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly as she whispered to her neighbor, "I've seen this before, back in the 60s. Some things never change," her voice heavy with the weight of memory, her perspective adding a historical depth to the moment, a reminder of how far society still had to go. Kenneth's face burned hotter, his ears turning red, the tide of opinion turning against him, the weight of the passenger's judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. But before he could respond, before he could lash out again, a voice crackled over the intercom, its tone calm and authoritative, cutting through the tension like a lifeline. "This is your captain speaking. We're preparing for takeoff. Please ensure all passengers are seated." Janelle stood, smoothing her blazer with a deliberate calm, her movements a stark contrast to the chaos Kenneth had created, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. She turned to Mia with a nod, her dark eyes steady, her expression unreadable but carrying a weight that silenced the cabin. "I'll be in the cockpit," she said, her voice calm but resonant, each word landing with a quiet power that seemed to ripple through the air, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Kenneth's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, his mind racing to make sense of her words. What did she mean, the cockpit? His breath hitched, his hands loosening their grip on the armrests, a seed of doubt taking root as he watched her walk away, her strides purposeful, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted aisle. Janelle's words hung in the air, the cabin falling into a stunned silence as she continued her walk toward the front of the plane, her strides confident and purposeful, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted aisle with a rhythm that seemed to echo the steady beat of her own resolve. Kenneth's mouth opened, then closed, his mind racing to make sense of what he'd just heard, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of disbelief and denial. The cockpit? His hands hovered over the armrests, frozen in mid-mater, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he tried to process the implications of her statement. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances, their whispers erupting like wildfire in the dim light, a mix of shock and awe rippling through the cabin as they pieced together the truth. Ethan's camera followed Janelle, his heart pounding with anticipation, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted the focus, a gut feeling telling him that something monumental was about to unfold, something that would change the narrative of this flight forever. Mia stepped aside, her arms crossing loosely over her chest, her lips parting in a faint smile as she watched Janelle approach the cockpit door, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. As a Latina woman who had faced her own share of prejudice, Mia felt a deep connection to Janelle's strength, a sense of camaraderie that made her eyes glisten with unshed tears, her perspective adding a layer of emotional depth to the moment, a shared triumph over the kind of discrimination they'd both endured. Janelle reached the cockpit door, her hand resting briefly on the handle, her posture straight and unwavering, a picture of poised determination that commanded the attention of every passenger in the cabin. She stepped inside briefly, the door closing behind her with a soft thud, leaving the cabin in a tense anticipation, the hum of whispers growing louder as passengers speculated about her words. Moments later, the door opened again and Janelle re-emerged, now dressed in a crisp white pilot's uniform, the 2 gold stripes on her shoulder boards gleaming under the cabin's soft lights. Her navy tie neatly knotted, a name tag reading Carter pinned to her chest. She turned, facing the cabin one last time, her dark eyes sweeping over the rows of seats, her gaze steady and unflinching, a quiet strength radiating from her that seemed to fill the space around her. "I'm Captain Janelle Carter," she announced, her voice steady, resonating with an authority that seemed to reverberate through the cabin, each word landing with a weight that silenced even the whispers. "I'll be flying this plane to Miami tonight." The cabin erupted in gasps, a few passengers clapping softly, their faces lighting up with admiration, their hands coming together in a quiet but heartfelt show of support for the woman who had just turned the tables on Kenneth's prejudice. A young girl, the same one who had smiled at Janelle earlier, clapped the loudest, her small hands moving with a fervor that spoke of pure, unfiltered admiration, her eyes shining with a hope that seemed to light up the dim cabin. A reminder of the innocence that still believed in justice, in the power of standing tall against hate. From her perspective, Janelle was more than a pilot, she was a hero, a woman who had faced down a storm of prejudice and emerged stronger, a beacon of what the girl hoped to become one day, a dream that now felt a little more within reach. Kenneth's entire body went rigid, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white, the leather creaking under the pressure, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts that seemed to echo the rapid pounding of his heart. His face paled, then flushed a deep crimson, the realization hitting him like a tidal wave, each wave crashing harder than the last, as the weight of his own prejudice came crashing down around him. The woman he'd tried to have removed, the woman he'd deemed unworthy of first class, was the pilot, the one person he had no choice but to trust with his life for the next 3 hours. His world tilted, his arrogance stripped away in an instant, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, the foundation of his entitlement crumbling beneath him like a house of cards in a storm. His eyes darted to Janelle, then away, unable to meet her gaze, the shame burning in his chest like a fire he couldn't extinguish, his hands trembling as he tried to regain some semblance of control, but there was none to be found. Ethan zoomed in on Kenneth's face, capturing the raw shock, the humiliation etched into every line of his expression, the beads of sweat now rolling down his temple, a stark contrast to the smug grin he'd worn just moments ago. Ethan's own heart swelled with a mix of triumph and relief, the anger that had simmered in his chest giving way to a quiet hope, a belief that justice, however small, had been served in this moment. He glanced at the young girl clapping, her smile a mirror of his own feelings, a reminder that moments like this could inspire change, could plant seeds of hope in those who witnessed them. A woman across the aisle, a retired teacher named Clara, leaned toward her husband, her voice thick with satisfaction as she whispered, "Serves him right." Her words a quiet victory for every student she'd ever defended in her decades of teaching diverse classrooms. Her glasses fogging slightly with the emotion she couldn't hold back. Clara's perspective added another layer to the moment. Her satisfaction rooted in a lifetime of fighting for equality. Seeing Kenneth's downfall as a small but significant step toward a world where prejudice no longer held sway. Kenneth's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, his mind racing for a way to salvage his dignity, but there was none. He was trapped, not just on the plane, but in the consequences of his own actions, the weight of the passenger's stares pressing down on him like a physical force. His hands fumbled with his briefcase, his fingers clumsy as he tried to open it, as if the act of organizing his papers could somehow restore the control he'd lost, but the latch wouldn't budge, his trembling hands betraying him. Janelle gave the cabin a final nod, her gaze lingering on Kenneth for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the power shift, her expression calm but her eyes carrying a quiet intensity that spoke of a strength forged through years of facing prejudice head-on. She stepped back into the cockpit, the door closing behind her with a definitive click, the sound echoing in the cabin like the final note of a symphony. A closing chapter on Kenneth's entitlement and the beginning of a new narrative, one where justice and dignity reigned supreme. The flight to Miami stretched into an agonizing 3 hours for Kenneth, every minute a reminder of his humiliation, the low hum of the engines a constant backdrop to his spiraling thoughts. Passengers whispered around him, their voices a soft murmur that seemed to pierce through the dim cabin, some stealing glances with narrowed eyes, others shaking their heads in quiet disapproval, their judgment a heavy weight on his shoulders. Ethan's video had been uploaded during the flight thanks to the plane's Wi-Fi, and by the time they landed at midnight, it had already garnered over 100,000 views, the hashtag #RacistOnFlight trending on social media, its reach spreading like wildfire across the digital landscape. Kenneth kept his head down, his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket, the vibrations a relentless reminder of the storm brewing outside. But he didn't dare look. Not yet, his fingers gripping the armrests as if they could anchor him against the tide of shame washing over him. His once pristine gray suit now felt suffocating, the fabric clinging to his skin with a dampness born of nervous sweat, a small but telling detail of his unraveling composure. As the plane touched down at Miami International Airport, Janelle's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, slicing through the tension like a beacon of stability. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miami. The local time is 12:03 a.m. I hope you had a pleasant flight," she said, her tone steady, each word a testament to her unshakable dignity. The cabin burst into applause, a standing ovation that echoed through the rows, passengers rising to their feet with faces lit up by admiration, their hands clapping in a heartfelt tribute to the captain who'd not only flown them safely, but had also stood up to injustice with quiet grace. An elderly man in a tweed jacket, seated near the front, clapped with a trembling hand, his voice barely audible as he whispered to his wife, "I marched for equality in '63. Never thought I'd see this day," his words heavy with the weight of history, his perspective adding a layer of depth to the moment, a bridge between past struggles and present victories. Kenneth remained seated, his face burning with a deep crimson, his hands trembling as he clutched his briefcase, the leather handle slick beneath his sweaty palms. When the doors opened, he hurried off the plane, his polished loafers clicking frantically against the jet bridge, each step a desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his actions. But there was no running from the storm waiting for him. Reporters had gathered at the gate, alerted by the viral video, their cameras flashing like lightning in the dimly lit terminal, their voices sharp as they shouted his name. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have a comment on the video?" one called out, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. Kenneth's stomach dropped, his breath catching in his throat. His name was out there, his reputation in tatters, the weight of public scrutiny crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Janelle stepped off the plane to a small crowd of supporters, passengers who'd seen the video and waited to shake her hand, their faces glowing with gratitude and respect. A young man in a denim jacket, who had been seated near the back, approached her first, his voice trembling with emotion as he said, "You're an inspiration, Captain." Janelle shook his hand, a small smile tugging at her lips, her heart swelling with pride. Not for herself, but for the message this moment sent, a quiet hope that her stand could inspire others to rise above hate. Ethan approached next, his camera now off, his hands steady as he extended one to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his eyes shining with a mix of relief and admiration. "You showed him what dignity looks like." Janelle nodded, her grip firm, her own emotions shifting from pride to a deeper gratitude, a recognition of the collective effort it took to expose Kenneth's prejudice. Ethan's video, the passenger's support, Mia's firmness had all played a role. From the perspective of the young man in the denim jacket, a college student named Marcus who had faced racial profiling himself, Janelle's calm strength was a lifeline, a reminder that resilience could triumph over hate, a lesson he vowed to carry with him as he pursued his dreams of becoming a lawyer to fight for justice. Mia lingered near the gate, watching the scene unfold, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her navy uniform still crisp despite the long flight. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but seeing Janelle handle Kenneth's prejudice with such grace had given her a renewed sense of purpose, her frustration from earlier now replaced by a quiet determination to advocate for change within the airline. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor, and hugged Janelle briefly, her grip a silent thank you for standing firm, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "You made us all proud." Janelle returned the hug, her own resolve strengthened by Mia's support, a shared understanding passing between them as women who had both faced discrimination in their careers. Meanwhile, Kenneth faced the consequences of his actions. His business associates distanced themselves, their emails curt and formal, and his position on a corporate board was revoked within hours. His downfall a public lesson in accountability that echoed far beyond the airport gates. His phone screen lit up with notifications, each one a dagger to his pride, a stark reminder that his entitlement had cost him everything he'd worked decades to build. 6 months later, the airline industry felt the ripple effects of Janelle's story, the viral video having sparked a nationwide conversation about racism in air travel, its impact reverberating through boardrooms and training sessions alike. New policies were implemented, mandatory anti-bias training for all airline staff, a passenger bill of rights emphasizing equality, and public campaigns promoting diversity in aviation, their posters lining airport terminals with images of pilots from all backgrounds, a visual testament to the change Janelle had inspired. Janelle became an advocate for inclusivity, speaking at industry conferences with a steady voice that commanded attention, her pilot's wings now a symbol of hope for aspiring aviators of color. At one event in Atlanta, she stood on stage, her crisp white uniform gleaming under the spotlight, her voice resonant as she shared her story, her words striking a chord with the audience. A young black woman named Aisha, a flight school student who'd faced her own share of prejudice, sat in the third row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes shining with determination as she listened. "She made me believe I could soar." Aisha later told a friend, her voice thick with emotion, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she clutched her flight manual, a tangible reminder of her dream now within reach. Mia, inspired by Janelle's example, took on a leadership role in the airline's diversity initiative, her resolve a testament to the change Janelle had sparked. She mentored younger flight attendants, teaching them how to handle discriminatory behavior with the same firmness she'd shown on that flight, her voice steady as she recounted the incident, her hands gesturing animatedly to emphasize the importance of standing firm. During one training session, she shared a small detail that had stayed with her, the way Janelle's hands had remained steady as she smoothed her blazer, a quiet act of composure that had given Mia the courage to confront Kenneth. From the perspective of a new flight attendant named Lila, a 24-year-old woman who had joined the airline just weeks before, Mia's mentorship was a lifeline, her stories a roadmap for navigating the challenges of the job, a reminder that she, too, could make a difference in the face of adversity. Ethan, meanwhile, used his platform as a journalist to amplify stories of injustice, his video becoming a catalyst for broader awareness, a tool for accountability that reached millions, its view count climbing into the millions as it was shared across platforms. He sat at his desk one evening, watching the numbers tick upward, a quiet smile spreading across his face as he realized the impact of his work, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose, a fulfillment born from knowing he'd helped spark a movement for change. At the Columbus airport, a small plaque was installed in the terminal, honoring Janelle's stand against prejudice, its inscription reading, "Fly with dignity," the bronze letters gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a permanent reminder of the power of resilience. Passengers passing by would pause, some taking photos, others reading the inscription with a quiet reverence, the plaque becoming a symbol of hope in an unexpected place. Janelle's journey touched countless lives, a story of justice that reminded the world of the strength found in standing tall against hate, its impact rippling outward like a stone dropped in still water. Her fight showed the power we hold to challenge injustice and create change, even in the face of adversity, a lesson that resonated deeply with those who heard her story. Have you ever faced prejudice and turned it into a moment of triumph? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear your victories, just like Janelle's. Stories that inspire us all to rise above. If this tale moved you, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories of courage and hope. Narratives that remind us to build a world where dignity reigns, a future we can all believe in. Change starts with you. Let's soar together toward a brighter tomorrow.